And South African rail, freight and port workers have rejected Transnet's latest pay offer.
They say that the strike will continue until their demands are met. Transnet, which operates South Africa's rail, freight and ports, has said it has raised its wage offer to 4.5% with an additional 5.3% annual increase over the next 2 years.
It's also offered a 4.5% increase in medical insurance allowances this year, but the United National Transport Union, one of the two unions represented at Transnet, says members have rejected the latest offer and will continue with their industrial action.
All right, so let's talk about the latest on the Transnet strike. Of course, this is in the context of business organizations saying that the effects here could be beyond devastating. Let's talk to Bowmans head of ports, transport and logistics, Andrew Pike. Mr. Pike, thank you for being with us. You were warning before that this could in fact be worse than what happened during COVID-19, because then you had some sort of skeleton staff. What sense are you getting about the impact of the strike over the last few days?
Evening, Francis and Bongiwe. Yeah, from what we're hearing, there are major issues in the supply chain. All of the Transnet port terminals, the TPT terminals, are constrained. We're hearing reports that they are, quote unquote, saturated with cargo. So, for instance, the car terminal, the containers, the agri terminals, the multi-purpose terminals have all got cargo sitting there which can't be taken away. And there's a rule of thumb by logistics experts that for each day of lost port productivity, it takes you 9 or 10 days to recover that. So if you take the container terminals, which I suppose are the biggest issue at the moment, you have containers stacked up there, but exporters are unable to come and collect them. Potentially they're running up massive storage costs, or one would hope that Transnet will forgive those storage costs, particularly as they've declared force majeure. But trucks can't come into the port to collect. And so you've got the position where you have a number of ships sitting outside the port. At last count, Durban had 30-odd ships sitting outside, not all container ships, but a number of them are. Now, those ships have to come in and discharge their containers, but they can't discharge if the container yards in the port are full. So you have to get to a situation where trucks can come in, remove containers, make space so that the ships sitting outside can then discharge. But we hear reports that there are in fact no trucks on the roads, particularly on the N3 corridor, and it's for obvious reasons. The trucks have no work, and that has its own impact on the supply chain. Truckers themselves, the truck drivers, are paid per load. So you have thousands of truck drivers who are earning nothing right now. You have fleet operators who are trying to meet their financial commitments on their fleets. And of course, if a truck's not working, it's not earning.
Yeah.
So, sorry.
Well, Agri-SA, I mean, some of those containers can just sit there, like you said, incurring costs, although maybe those will be forgiven. But Agri-SA concerned about imports of food, things like that. So, some containers cannot just sit there. That's the point. The city of Cape Town, I think, made an estimate that this cost, the cost could be 6 billion to 8 billion rand a day. How does that sound to you?
That sounds high, but it's an unquantifiable loss, which is the real problem. But to take your point, some of the cargoes are very time sensitive. Fruit, for instance, time and seasonal sensitive. Some cargoes will have to get onto the shelves for Christmas. And if you've got that sort of 10 to 1 day's recovery, you may not even get products reaching the shelves for the December holiday. But, you know, fruit cargoes will A, potentially go off, and B, they will not meet the season that they are meant to meet. And so that's a write-off which can never be caught up. Some of the other cargoes, for instance, the sort of dry bulk cargoes, which are constrained now by the freight rail strike, may be caught up. But again, there are sensitivities around prices there. The prices of your dry bulks, your coals, your iron ore, and so on are hugely volatile, and there are big swings. And traders and miners are trying to take advantage of the market as best they can. And I think that you can see the market's concern and pessimism over the strike is well reflected in the falling share prices of the big miners, the Kumbas, the Tungelas, and Exaro, and so on. So, yeah, it's, there's a knock-on effect all the way up and down the supply chain.
So what do you think of a plan? Reportedly, businesses have offered to pay increased fees for services, kind of a strike avoidance levy. Is that viable? Is there any way to cushion the blow here with some sort of extra fee?
As well meant as that proposal is, I think it's one of the worst ideas I've heard for a long time. And I'm not sure that those people lived through the 80s. The truth of the matter is I'm not sure that business can contract on behalf of every importer and exporter in South Africa to pay a strike levy in respect of every ingoing and outgoing container. What troubles me more is that if the private sector comes in to bail out Transnet, is that not an open invitation to every SOE, every public sector, to go on strike and hope that the private sector will come rushing in to save them? And ultimately, that strike levy is going to be paid by you and me through, increases in prices at the store. So I don't think it's a good idea at all. I think it's a very well-meant idea, but I don't think it's going to resolve the problem, and I think it potentially raises far bigger issues than it solves.
Let me put something to you finally. There's been COVID-19, unemployment, the flooding, the load shedding. CIFSA, one of the organizations, saying that this could be the final nail in the coffin. That sounds so bleak, suggesting our economy is dying in a sense, and this is the end of it. I mean, at what point does an economy die? At what point do you say there's no point of return now? Because there can always be some sort of return, some sort of pickup. We have to go on. I guess the fact is everybody's saying we're just in such a bad state for this to happen. Do you agree?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we're in a terrible state for this to happen. And, the well-publicized unemployment figures, the high inflation rates, the sort of unbearable cost of living crisis are all very real and alive in our lives, and particularly for the poorest of the poor. What a strike like this does, because of its impact on the overall supply chain, is it just aggravates those crises. To give you an example, in 2010, when Transnet went on strike in much the same manner, the shipping lines all imposed a strike levy, if you can call it that, of something between $50 and $200 per container on every container, because they knew there were going to be delays. Someone has to pay for that, and it's ultimately going to be your importers or exporters, and they're just going to add that on to their prices. So while this may, if the number is right, solve some of the cost of living crisis for Transnet's employees, they're a very small part of a much bigger picture. And the bigger picture is the man in the street. And everyone is going to end up paying Transnet's employees. That's the net effect of it. So is it the last nail in the coffin? I don't know. We've seen a lot of nails in the coffin, and the coffin still doesn't seem to have gone underground. But it certainly is another huge blow to the economy.
Thank you very much. The head of Port Transport Logistics at Bowmans law firm, Andrew Pike.